Welcome back as we explore Black History Month at Flagstaff High School. A lot of things to cover today, so turn up the volume. Stay with me. During the first part of the 20th century, 1909, let's say, segregation was everywhere. It was in our schools, it was in our theaters, in our restaurants, and yes, it was even in our churches. And that's why they're depicted on the side of the Murdoch mural. The churches in Flagstaff are some of our most beautiful buildings, but they also remind us of some really dark times in U.S. history. Each of these churches became very important centers for the Black and Hispanic communities in the early 1900s at Flagstaff. Each of the churches were built for a specific reason. Not because it was so overcrowded in church, we had so many parishioners trying to get in. It was because of racism and segregation, causing our Black and Hispanic communities to build churches of their own because they weren't allowed to sit in the churches that were developed for the white people in Flagstaff at the time. On the south side of Flagstaff, these churches resided fairly close together. First Missionary Baptist Church, we have the Riverside Church across the street, almost Spring Hill Baptist, and then across and up here, this off of San Francisco Street, this would have been the Harbor Chapel. While we're on Google Maps, I thought I'd show you something because I think we need to call out Google Maps and ask them to fix their maps. Let me tell you why. Here's the train tracks that divide north from south on Flagstaff. On the south side of the tracks, you can see Riles Drive. Remember, Mr. Riles was a principal at Dunbar School, first Black American to attend Arizona Teachers College, first one to graduate with a teaching degree as well. Worked with Sturgeon Cromer to stop racism in our public schools and segregation, was the first Black man to become the state of California superintendent of instruction. Yeah, that guy. On the north side of the tracks, they still have it listed as Agassiz Street. That just seems wrong in every way. So let's talk about this for a moment since it's there. Remember, Agassiz Street was renamed Riles Street, or Riles Drive in Flagstaff, when the city council decided Agassiz was a bit of a racist man, and let me tell you why. He was into polygenism, right? He was understanding and trying to prove his entire life that one race was superior over the other. And to do that, he had to prove that there was two genetically different makeups.
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
Guess what? He was wrong. I even read some articles. Charles Darwin couldn't even support his theory of polygenism. Okay, I digress. Let's move on. I have two more places I want to talk to you about before we finish up with the places on the Murdoch mural. Man, that's hard to say. Anyways, one of these places that we talk about that was developed because of the racism, because of the segregation back in Flagstaff in the 1900s, the early part of the 1900s, was the Bass Tourist Home. Although it didn't look like this when it was built in 1926, it housed the Bass community as they would come through Flagstaff herding sheep. A famous part of this is the brick wall behind there that was made for the Basque handball courts. Go by and take a look. We mentioned earlier that theaters were even part of that segregation, and although not depicted on the Murdoch mural, I think it's important to talk about. In the early 1900s in Flagstaff, they had two theaters, one for Blacks, one for whites. The one for the Blacks was shut down in 1954, right around Riles and Sturgeon Cromer ended segregation in the public schools. But they shut down the Black one, which left the white one, the Orpheum Theater. The Black Theater was located just north of Marley's, off of the main drag in Flagstaff. I think this is the building, but I'm not sure. The theater for the whites was the Orpheum Theater, just a few blocks away. When the segregation laws were finally deemed unlawful, unfair, the Black Theater was closed, and they were invited to come to the Orpheum Theater. But here's the catch. You have to sit in the balcony. You can't sit down on the floor. This was another atrocity that was committed by our town. All right, and I love Flagstaff, but I think we have to look at our history and say, how can we be even better? I hope you enjoyed this installment of Black History Month. Welcome to Flagstaff High School.